your preseason predictions
Okay.
award stuff too, so that'll be a good one too. I'm gonna do. I updated my title of the Google Doc, so hopefully that'll be easier to find as we need it more.
Okay.
All right, testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
The fuck happened?
Did not go through.
I heard myself say testing and then it cut out.
Well, it just sound.
Now I hear no, like it like went mute.
I don't know. Maybe the I have like a noise gate that's too high or something. All right, let's try it again.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
That's fine. YouTube's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I did turn the noise gate down a little bit, so hopefully that'll help.
I've never had that happen before. It was like I heard myself say testing, and then there was nothing after that. I was like, I thought I had crashed.
Are you ready to get started?
Yes, sir.
Hello and welcome to episode 214 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we have a roster change in the CDL. I think this is one of the only times where we actually talked about something and then it came true within a normal degree of time, which was very nice. And it was actually announced before we could actually do this show. And we have some other stuff that we obviously want to talk about, including our power rankings, which we have not updated in a little over 2 months, almost 3 months now. So I think that'd be nice to revisit and hopefully correct some things that I think we've gotten wrong since late November when we did the initial power rankings set. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bank?
Yeah, doing all right. I'm pretty sure I said at the end of last episode that I thought the power rankings for this episode was gonna be a good opportunity to update them because I wasn't anticipating any roster changes or big news to happen between our Sunday show and this show for the upcoming week. And naturally, again, I'm off a little bit on that, but um, I think we both in part at least sort of mentioned last episode how I know I at least mentioned proactivity for some of these teams potentially trying to get ahead of the curve and instead of just letting issues fester or whatever, make a little bit of a proactive move. So we'll be able to jump right into all that. But yeah, it should be a good clean show today, hopefully.
The team that we talked about that really needed, or most likely were going to be proactive, was Toronto, and we talked about specifically what they would do, and I think we both came to the conclusion that if you have to take one of these players out of the roster right now, it's probably ReeaL, mostly just because he hasn't been playing well and the roles have not been working out. Before this first week of the major two qualifiers, Toronto role swapped both ReeaL and Kleenex. So Kleenex, who was on the flex, went to SMG, and then ReeaL, who was on the SMG, went to flex. They went 0-2 in that first week. I think we said their losing streak was 7 matches, if I'm not mistaken. They're trending really in a very bad direction toward the bottom of the CDL, which is certainly not what you would expect of this team historically, or even this roster that they signed before the year. But they make this roster change now. I should credit Ronnie Intel. He put out a report at 11:46 a.m. Eastern on February 17th, just a few hours later, Toronto announces at 2:08 p.m. Eastern that ReeaL had been benched and that Kipps had replaced him in the starting roster. So Kipps comes from the Huntsman Challengers roster. We talked very little about him when he kind of came on board, and there were rumors that he had joined as a substitute for Toronto, and now we have official confirmation that he's going to be in the starting lineup this week. He's replacing ReeaL. It definitely seems like he's on the flex, and that Kleenex will be staying at the SMG role, and that Kipps will be coming in and replacing ReeaL in that fashion, which is interesting. I wonder what kind of the thinking was with this team and that role swap specifically, because they only did 1 week of it, with Kleenex back on the sub. Maybe it was just they knew that it was kind of coming to an end with ReeaL and decided to get Kleenex on his preferred role anyway. But I would like to get your thoughts on this because we talked a lot about Toronto. They were probably the most talked about team on the last show that we did. But what do you think now that it's official, ReeaL out and Kipps in?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, said it last episode, we've been two leading proponents of the Super Saiyan ReeaL Club, and it's kind of weird to be in this position to see him back in Challengers now, which it's actually we ironically we're talking about like potential roster changes for Toronto being like Joe DeCeves going elsewhere and that being like a big domino effect or whatever, and the ReeaL benching here actually does have a decent domino effect on some challengers teams and in particular one notable phase substitute, which I'm kind of leaking without saying the name there, but um in terms of just this Kipps and ReeaL swap, I think you kind of summed it up pretty well. That it felt like, although they didn't do a lot of give a lot of time to ReeaL on the flex, it kind of just felt like they were in a position where they had to be a little more proactive in trying to make a move instead of just letting this
Yep.
stew and have losses continue to pile up. Um, don't know much about Kips. I do think just in and overall, I think it is a little interesting that the Huntsman project for challengers, optic for having a challengers team started this year with the Renegade being like kind of like the main attraction, if you will, for that roster is like a Halo MVP, like big name Halo player, and then surrounding him with three guys. And now two of the guys surrounding Renegade on that Huntsman team have been picked up into the CDL,
Mm-hmm.
and that's Neum with LAT and now Kips. So um, not gonna pretend to know a ton about Kips, but obviously the Huntsman I think got fourth at the Challengers Open because they played Bush the first match on Sunday, I believe. So I'm pretty sure they got fourth at the Major One Challengers land. So um, I think this is potentially it's a one person change right now that could in turn lead to two positive changes if Kips is a reliable flex, and it leads to Kleenex getting back on a full-time SMG. It could be one of those rare cases where like just changing one player can impact the team to a bigger degree as well. So interested to see how this will play out with Toronto. They have some tough matches coming up this week, so not sure exactly how well we're going to be able to gauge the new roster, but it's also possible that this isn't the only change that Toronto makes, so that could be another interesting twist in this little mini roster mania saga right now.
Yeah, on that point, the rumors have kind of pointed to Insight possibly going out of this roster and Nasty potentially coming in. And I texted you when I saw that, and I said I almost, excuse me, I almost brought it up on the last episode, but your response to me was kind of how I talked myself out of bringing it up, and you said. Feel like it'd be weird for Boston, but what do I know? And I literally thought that while we were talking, I was like, it would make a lot of sense for Toronto to get
Yeah.
Nasty. It just wouldn't make very much sense for Boston to let go of Nasty. The only explanation would be a money centric move. Like
Yes.
obviously, if Boston has no championship aspirations. That's not a realistic path for them at any point of the season. But they certainly can get to champs. They can certainly beat good teams, as we've seen them do multiple times over the past few years. But if they let go of Nasty, regardless of who they replace him with, I think that's probably going to be a downgrade, and they're going to get worse, and they might not make champs. And it also signals to the fan base, and I don't know how large the Boston Breach fan base is. I am part of it on occasion, but I think it also signals to your fans when you do something like that winning is not really a priority here, and competing is not much of a priority, or at least it's not as big of a priority as getting money. And I think that is a losing message to your fans. But I'm also not a businessman, so I'm not thinking like the X's and O, or I'm not thinking of like the numbers necessarily. I'm thinking about like, well, maybe you could get to champs. Maybe you can have a run like you did at the end of last season, where you kind of come out of nowhere and you have like a great performance. But if you let go of Nasty, I don't think that is a realistic path, even though it's not a likely one already. But yeah, Nasty's probably been the best player for Boston this season, even better um, than or I was gonna say Snoopy. Yeah, better than Snoopy. And I don't know, like Toronto, it would be great. Or I think Nasty would be great on a lot of teams. To be honest, a lot of teams need AR players, and he's a good one. So why not? But at the same point, I think it'd be hard to kind of pluck him out of the breach. But what do you think about even the possibility of that happening, where Nasty goes to Toronto?
Yeah, I mean, it's a move that would be awesome for Toronto, I think. I mean, even dating back to the offseason, we were looking as the offseason unfolded, and I think it was after the report of Ghosty to Gentlemates kind of went through, we were looking at the options because at that time, Insight was technically not re-signed to Toronto yet, and we were looking at some of the AR potential options for Toronto, and we mentioned Nasty. The only thing at that time was that Nasty wasn't really viewed as a true main AR, and I still don't know if I really view him as a true main AR.
Yeah.
I think he can do it with both guns, but I do think he is better with an AR than a sub, so he's kind of like a flex and like maybe like a 70-30 flex as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
like a 60-40 or a 50-50. But we've talked about it in recent episodes. It feels like I even saw a clip recently of Zuma talking about like just the roles in Call of Duty have evolved to the point where you really got to be able to do it with every gun. And I think that could be something that benefits this Toronto team, especially in this early in the season and with the Kleenex Flex experiment. I think if the meta ever evolves throughout this Black Ops season in a world where you have Kleenex and Nasty and potentially Kips, if Kips is a true flex, you got multiple players on your guys who can adapt to the meta, and if it needs to go to a 3 AR meta for any reason, or 4 AR meta, whatever the case may be, like you have the adaptability there. So I do sort of I mean I really like the idea of it for Toronto's sake. I just again I think it would signal for Boston that Toronto had to pay a pretty substantial buyout, and I don't even know what Nasty's buyout would technically be, so I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but it would definitely be um sort of signaling that Boston's just like packing it up and just doing what they can with what they have at this time to try and be as competitive as possible, sort of like a Moneyball esque thing without the championship aspiration. It'd be like Moneyball to try and get eighth place sort of deal. Um, but yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Like without even looking at the stats, just like on a feel basis, I feel like at worst, Nasty has been the second best player on Boston, and I definitely think you could make the argument for the best player at certain times, and that's just like on a feel basis without even looking at the numbers. Um, there were also rumors after Major One of Boston potentially evaluating roster changes in place of Cammy and Per J. Just none of that stuff happened, so. I mean, is this a situation where if Boston do end up shipping Nasty to Toronto, that they could just like in theory squad wipe Nasty, Purge, and Cammy, and then rebuild around Snoopy with some more young guys to try and uh find some pieces for next year. I'm not really sure what they would do. We've also seen Kenny's name thrown in the ring, which I kind of jokingly brought up last episode for Toronto, but it was also I don't remember if it was in Ronnie's report or in another thing, but it was sort of like Kenny could be an option for Toronto, or he could be an option for Boston if Nasty goes to Toronto. So that's a little interesting here. Um, Not entirely sure. I do think in a world where Boston did squad wipe, I wouldn't mind seeing Snoopy, Kenny plus two challengers players because I think Kenny could be like that de facto leader on a team. Kenny could help Snoopy continue to develop. Snoopy would inevitably learn a bunch from playing with Kenny, even if Kenny struggles individually. And then you get two more challengers guys on that team around them, and potentially you find somebody to pair with Snoopy going into off season next year as a team of two, as opposed to just like Snoopy looking for three. So a bunch of interesting things that could come out of this. I'm not sure if this is something that we'll hear unfolds before the matches this week. Maybe it's something like Toronto struggles this week and then they go after Nasty next week and then it's another domino effect. So could be something that is a developing piece that we have to keep an eye on. But I do think, the money element on both sides here would be the biggest concern for me in terms of Boston potentially making moves to either get rid of Nasty or then potentially look at other challengers players. Just like the thought of the similar to what I said with Cloud9. I didn't think Cloud9 was going to make a ton of roster moves because of what we heard about the financial constraints or whatever around that team. We know reportedly Boston was pretty close seemingly to not even being in the CDL like 2-ish years ago. So wouldn't be surprised if the team was just trying to stick it out with the roster and not spend a ton of extra money on more players. But uh, at this point, I really I'm my gauge for whether roster changes are or won't happening seems to be broken. So I'm not gonna trust my gut on that.
Yeah, I think Kenny on Boston makes a bit of sense. Obviously, so what I would do if I'm Boston, I'm not letting Nasty or Snoopy go. Like that's just not happening. Until the offseason, whatever happens, happens. But like I do believe that there are an obvious bottom two in the CDL, and that's Vancouver and C9. So really, you really only have to beat out two other teams to get the champs. And who knows if Toronto's going to be able to fix whatever's going on there. We've seen in the past that some of the teams in that top seven or top 6 or 7 just kind of fall off the face of the earth. We saw it with Optic last year that they really had to make a push late in the season to get the champs. So maybe something like that happens. So for me, if I'm Boston, I'm sticking with those two at least, and then kind of figure out the rest. But if they were to make a move and let Nasty go to Toronto, try to compete for a championship, would be very nice of them, but not great for their own selves. Then I think Kenny does make a lot of sense. I don't think he has a ton of suitors. He's not going to be especially expensive, I would imagine. And like you said, he does have a lot of experience that hopefully he can help Snoopy with. And he is a natural AR. Like he has proven over years that he can play that role, even though it hasn't been, especially successful over the last 2 seasons. But I think it would be interesting. It would be kind of deflating for Boston in general after having like a pretty inspiring season last year and having some big wins over the past few years, just to kind of revert to a guy who's now been dropped. Well, he's dropped by 2 teams, and then Minnesota he didn't re-sign with. So like he's been on 3 teams in less than a year. That typically is not great. Is not an indicator of a lot of future success, but Boston, I guess, is maybe not in that position to be picky with some of their guys. So yeah, but I think we should mention that Toronto, the only change right now that we know is confirmed is ReeaL out, Kip's in. We'll see what happens past this week. I'm interested to see how Kip's performs. He's you just mentioned the preseason that the same time that we did our power rankings, we did our preseason predictions. They were talking about rookies of the year. There are a lot of rookies that we did not mention because they were not in the CDL by the time we did that. So he is another one of them, and I think he's come in early enough. And I don't think any other rookie has shown to be like so exceptional that they can't be kind of usurped as the leading candidate for rookie of the year at this point. So he does have a chance, in my opinion.
That is an interesting thing to consider in this sense. Is we've always said that feels like a lot of the rookie of the years who don't play the full season don't get full consideration. But I also feel like a lot of those names came in much later than just after missing one event last year. So maybe this is the year that somebody doesn't play a technical full season and the CDL gets the Roy.
Yeah, and especially because I think if they come in after the major two qualifiers, it's over. Like I don't know. You'd have to be like a Mercules level, like championship
Yeah.
changing, altering player for me to care at all about your rookie of the year campaign. But because major two qualifiers are 11 online matches, then you go to LAN. I just don't think at that point, I think that's kind of the cutoff. If Kip's coming in, he's going to play 9. Like if he sticks with this roster or whatever, like, and I don't imagine that he won't. That's 9 qualifier matches in these before major 2, and then whatever happens at major 2, granted if they get there, I think that gives him a lot of time and he can still kind of make it up. Next up, I think we should talk just real briefly about the implications that you mentioned about. So Kips goes from the Huntsman, a top challengers roster, to Toronto, replaces ReeaL. ReeaL then goes to challengers, and he joins Omit, who drops a Luca to fit ReeaL in that into that roster. And Aluka, according to Zuma, had kind of talked to him and said, like, these are the guys that I want. And it seemed like Aluka was going to be a stallion and kind of create his own team. And then Zuma said the day after he talked with Aluka sketched to Falcons Academy Green. And that team that would have been a Stallions team kind of blew up in his face, which I think is very interesting. But now Aluka is on Falcons Academy Green, ReeaL on Omit. What do you think about all of that where, we thought Aluka was kind of like the king to come, basically. He was going to be next up, and he still is a substitute for FaZe Vegas. But him getting dropped is pretty surprising considering where he was even about a month ago.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight's a hell of a thing, but there was like the talks at the time when Aluka was on his, you know, like bursting through the scene moment there that like I'm pretty sure Rafi said something to the effect of he didn't want Aluka to sign with a bottom team and sort of just like waste away on a low CDL team. Now it's at the point where he could have had the opportunity to potentially join some of these other CDL teams, but instead he's a phase substitute, and now he's not even technically on Omit anymore. I'm sure that there has been some stuff like in the challenger scene where like Omit is still technically contracting these players and loaning them to other challengers teams. So I would be very surprised if that wasn't the case with Aluka, especially just assuming the buyout attached with his supposed contract with FaZe. It just wouldn't make sense from a business perspective for Omit to completely cut ties with him. So I think that's the biggest interest for me in this developing situation is that Aluka isn't involved with the FaZe Falcons Academy team that Zuma is like sort of collabing with Falcons on, and instead he's on just a Falcons Academy team. When you hear about like FaZe and Falcons collaborating on a Challengers team, you would think the FaZe substitute would be a part of it, and it's a little interesting to me that that's not how it played out. I saw that clip or whatever where Zuma said there was some potential sketching or whatever going on there. So not too sure of all the details there, but um the interesting thing about this new Falcons Academy Green team is that it's got QK and Aluka both on that team, and QK was one of the bigger names after Major One, and so far early in the Challenger season has been one of the most interesting names from especially from the Saudi scene. So kind of pairing up two of the most hyped up young prospects potentially from two different regions is something interesting here. And then Standy's on this team, which I think is on the previous Falcons Academy team, they had ASIM, which ASIM is now on Omit, ironically. Um, Even this Phase Falcons collab team has Paul X on it. So, like, kind of, I guess Standy being a veteran isn't something I'd necessarily think of in, a couple previous years ago, but that's where we're at now. That kind of Standy's the vet on this squad with young guys Aluka, QK, and Roxas around him. So, um, it's always interesting to see how the challengers rosters shake out just because the changes happen so often in that scene. Sort of brings me back to the OG days of Black Ops 2 and Ghosts when pros were sketching every other day because they weren't tied to a contract or anything. So um yeah, I do think it is kind of funny how, Toronto in turn led to uh, a domino effect of roster moves that affects all the way down to a Luca, but that's the world we live in right now. So I'm interested to see how it all shakes out for everybody.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting for me just to see Aluka's reputation change in a pretty short amount of time, and almost all of it, or probably all of it, being related to online matches. And then we always talk about like how people say, well, he's an onliner. It's just he's not as good as on LAN. And yet, like, a lot of these decisions are made based on online results and almost only online results. So I find that intriguing. But the biggest part for me is that Aluka has proven that he's pretty good with AR, and then also he's now going to be an SMG on this new roster, and I think that's interesting. Like, that does bode well for him, I will say, because the flexibility is very, very valuable in the CDL, like we've talked about. Like, the reason that Insight currently is on Toronto is that Toronto didn't have a plethora of AR players to choose from, and that's why Nasty is probably, if Boston is willing to part ways with him, is probably a valuable commodity in the CDL for multiple teams, not just Toronto. So if Aluka can show that he is competent with an SMG as well as an AR on top challengers teams against former CDL pros and with former CDL pros, then I think that bodes very well for his future. It also makes it a little more likely, right, that he would be on phase by the end of the season if he's able to kind of be good on either, because then it's not just, well, you can only replace one or two guys. You're not going to replace Simp, but you could replace three guys instead of just one or two. And that increases the likelihood that he actually gets on phase. And I don't know if that's actually that's a likely occurrence. I don't know how you feel about that, but it definitely seemed like almost a certainty when he got signed that he would at some point be on the FaZe Vegas starting roster. And now we're mid-February, and I don't know if that's a certainty anymore.
No, I don't think it is, and I do think that was part of the calculus in signing a Luca to a sub, is that Phase look at him as potentially more of a long-term piece than a short-term remedy. But at the time they quote unquote signed him, it may have been more likely that he was considered a short-term piece over long-term. But I think certainly over the course of the qualifiers leading into Major One, it got to the point where FaZe pretty evidently weren't going to be considering roster moves, and they probably just like put a Luca on the back burner, and now they lose to Miami, so I don't know what the hell is going on.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's a very weird situation, but that's challengers in general, and
Yep.
challengers basically like just a big set of dominoes, and anytime the CDL moves around, the dominoes start falling, and you never really know where they're going to be falling. So we'll keep an eye on Aluka and the challenger scene. This is, I mean, we've talked about challengers like all but like 1 or 2 episodes this season, which is definitely a record for the Ego Chall podcast. And the only other challengers thing I think we have on today is that FaZe and the ReeaL Falcons announced the collaboration, and they will have a merged challengers roster. So Falcons is continuing to have their academy rosters, but they also are collaborating with FaZe for the FaZe Falcons challengers roster, which includes Swooty, Paul X, Gentle, and Nox. So Gentle and Nox are both Saudi players, and then obviously Paul X and Swooty are North American players. I think it's an interesting team. I know nothing about Gentle or Nox. I haven't seen Swooty play a ton. Obviously, I have seen Paul X play a lot. But what do you think about this? Maybe not just the roster, but the idea of two CDL teams coming together in this fashion to create a merged challengers team.
Yeah, I mean, really, my only main thought here is that this would have been the perfect uh, spot for a Luca to be on a challengers team. It feels like that the phase substitute player should be like, especially with everything we thought about Aluka just a couple months ago. If he was the face of a phase challengers team, it would have made a ton of sense. So that's the only weird thing for me here. I think Swooty is um, sort of like the top stallion remaining at the time, especially after multiple stallions got picked up by C9. So it's possible that um, Swooty is sort of in a position now to be like next man up in terms of the Stallions graduating class of challengers to CDL pipeline sort of deal. But yeah, outside of the Aluka thing, I don't know anything about the two Saudi guys here. I think, like I mentioned, Paul X being the vet on this team to have some sort of veteran presence is a good thing. Similar to what I was saying with Standy for the Falcons Academy team, it's just it feels a little weird. Aluka isn't on this team to me, but that's challengers, baby.
It certainly is. Do you want to do our power rankings now?
Yeah.
So I guess I'll go first. Just give me a second to pull it up. But as you were talking throughout the episode, I was like tweaking my power rankings because I did it once and I was like, that sounds fine, and then I did it again and I was like, oh, that's a little bit better. I still don't feel very confident at all about these power rankings, and I just think that's kind of the state of the CDL at this point. But yeah, I'll pull it up on screen for anybody watching on either YouTube or Spotify. But basically, and I've said this before with all of the power rankings that we've ever done, that I do power rankings in the sense of like, if the season ended today, who do I think has the most likely path to a world championship? And that's how I view power rankings. I don't know how else I would really do them, because otherwise then I would just look at the standings of whatever it is now. Like, we would look at the week 1 standings from Major 2 qualifiers and just say that is the power rankings, and I don't like doing that. So I originally had the Paris Gentlemates at the very top by themselves, and I said that they're, the best team in the game. And I still believe that, but the way that I put it in this is because I don't think that there's a ton of space between Paris and Optic and FaZe. I think those 3 teams are very close to each other in terms of skill and in terms of talent, and in terms of the proven results. Even though Paris did win, we obviously saw that Optic was very close to beating Paris in that grand finals as well. So I put I put Paris, Optic, and FaZe all in a tier by themselves at the very top. And I said that's the proven title contenders. And I feel very good about that. I would say in each of these tiers, or maybe not in every single tier, but in most of these tiers, the order in which the teams appear in the tier, I think that's probably how I would rank them. So Paris would be 1, Optic 2, FaZe 3. And then the tier below that is a 2-team tier. and that is LA Thieves and the and I almost said Minnesota Rocker because of the logo, but G2 Minnesota. Those two teams are together for me. I was tempted to put LAT in that proven title contenders tier and put title contenders plus LAT because I don't think that they have proven it at any point this season that they are actual contenders, but the roster would certainly say that they are. Whereas Minnesota's kind of the opposite. Their roster would not say that they are a championship level team, and yet they're the team that's beaten FaZe twice and given Optic two Game 5 runs and certainly looked like a top 4 team, top 5 team this season. So I put them together, and I think if the season ended today, I would have more confidence that LAT would win the championship over Minnesota, but I think it's close enough that I put them together. And then I was very, very kind of conflicted about where to put Toronto in any of this because they're legitimately one of the worst teams in the CDL at this point, but they have enough talent, specifically Joe and Kleenex, where I feel like I can't count those guys out, and that if they're able to put it together, and I think that eventually they will be, that they will be able to be somewhat competitive. I don't know how competitive. I don't think they'll get to the Paris Optic phase tier, but I think they should be a tier above if they're able to put it all together. So I put them in that third tier, and I said talent is there, probably question mark, because the Falcons are kind of in a similar position where there's a lot of talent on that team. They have Pred and Celium for Christ's sakes. Like that's about as good of a duo as you can possibly get. And yet we just saw them go 0-2 this past week. They didn't perform particularly well at Major 1. And then the Miami Heretics, we saw last year how good they could be at I don't know if they're at their best, but certainly close to it, and they haven't been as consistent this year, but I think there is something there. We just saw them pull off a big win over FaZe last week. So I decided to put them all there. Toronto is the one where people could be like, really? The team that is third to last and has lost for a month straight, they probably shouldn't be there, but I'm banking on the talent of the team and basically half the team that it'll all work out in the end. And then I have the second to last tiers, Boston and Carolina. Carolina, I mean, it's just because that land performance was so bad. I have no idea what to really expect from them. And then Boston, they can pull off wins, but I don't think that they're going to be higher than like 7th place or 8th place by the end of the season. So even with a roster change, and certainly if Nasty gets put off this roster, like they're probably closer to the last tier, which is just C9 and Vancouver, which I put as T12. Yeah, they're the two worst teams. Toronto probably should be in that group based on recent results, but I don't think C9 or Vancouver have any chance of winning anything this year. I think that they're the two least likely teams to even make it to champs, so they are certainly at the bottom of my power rankings. Any thoughts? I know we have some similarities. There's going to be a lot of similarities, I'm sure. Anything that stands out to you in my power rankings?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would, as any longtime listener of the Ego Chall podcast, they might be a little surprised to hear me say this, but I think the one thing that I would potentially argue here is moving FaZe down to the has to prove it out of
Mm-hmm.
the proven title contenders. I think I'm fine with Optic and Gentlemates being both up there, just given the way Major One shaked out and how close the finals was, and the fact that Optic uh, beat Gentlemates in the winners finals, and then Gentlemates had to win multiple searches to take the title. So I think I that's what I probably would have done, and especially if we were doing this post Major One, maybe I'd be fine with FaZe there. But I think after just this last week, me really just being confused about that Miami loss, I would have been probably more inclined to bump FaZe down a little bit. I think pretty much everything else makes sense to me. I think LAT, I still want to see more with Neum on the squad before I get like too excited or too bold with expectations for that team. But obviously, the other three guys around Neum are high caliber players, so I don't think you could place them any lower. I Yeah, I think other than that, I did probably Toronto. I mean, I did my power rankings before we even heard about this Toronto roster change stuff, so now I'm even sort of like lower on Toronto, just in the
Yeah.
sense of I haven't seen the roster play, so it's tougher to really gauge them for these specific power rankings. But yeah, outside of the phase thing, I think everything makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I totally get that. I put FaZe up there because we saw FaZe beat Paris earlier this season. I think that was
Yeah,
Paris's first loss of the year, if I'm not mistaken. And granted, that was probably 2 months ago now. I think that was before the break or right after the break. So, yeah, I think that I just have a lot of faith in FaZe to
sure.
be in that. Like, I think they'll get the championship Sunday, and I think that if you put them in a best of 5 or a best of 7 or whatever, I think that it's probably maybe 40-60, maybe 50-50 that they beat either Optic or Paris when they play them. I would still give the edge to Paris and Optic. But even then, like, we just saw Optic uh, as of like a month ago just absolutely dismal, and they were losing a bunch of their matches and didn't feel like they were a contender going into Major 1 because of how they finished the qualifiers. But obviously, that Major 1 performance kind of changed some things, and
Yep.
yeah. But I think Toronto is the one where I felt like the least confident, especially in relation to other teams, because I certainly couldn't put them. I didn't feel like I could put them below the Boston Breach, because I think Toronto, even if they're very inconsistent and even bad right now, I I think like if you just put them in a tournament, most people would be like, yeah, Toronto has a more likely path to actually winning something rather than Boston. And Carolina, I think, had they had like even a normal uh, tournament at Major 1, they're probably in that talent is there probably tier, because
Sure.
they've shown it more than some of these other teams that would seem to have more talent on their roster. Do you want to do your power rankings now?
Yeah.
I'll
So
pull
I
it up on
went
screen.
through a couple iterations of mine. The one I settled on in the end was I didn't do the fancy names like Preston as tradition, but S tier I had Gentlemates on their own, A tier Optic, LAT, and Phase, B tier G2 and Miami, C tier Boston, Carolina Falcons, and D tier Toronto, C9, and Vancouver. The other iteration that I was considering was Optic on their own in A. A tier below that would have been LAT and Phase, and in between that, so it would have been Paris on their own, Optic on their own, a tier below. Below that, LAT and Phase, and then everything else. And the other thing would have been Toronto on tier above C9 in Vancouver, and those two in the last spots. My thinking was that was heading into Major Two. There's two teams not going to be at Major Two. So that's why I was like, I think the last tier being only two teams would have made sense in that sense. Weird saying sense multiple times. Sorry. Um, but in the end, especially with the Toronto roster changes now, I really just they've struggled so mightily lately that I until I see this team play, I don't think I can really put them any higher, or I don't want to overthink it at all. So just gonna put them where they are at this particular time. And similar to what I was kind of outlining with you with your top tier, my thinking was I just think Gentlemates overall this season have looked like the strongest team, factoring in like the lulls we kind of talked about for both Gentlemates and Optic from the first break in the qualifiers. Like it just feels like both teams rebounded, but Paris's rebound was a little. I don't know how else to say it, but they were just like a little more convincing for me, and they did end up winning the title, so I felt like they deserved to be on their own. But I can totally see the argument for putting, kind of as we just outlined. I think that the top two there, if you wanted to do Gentlemates and Optic on together up top, like I can totally see that argument. You want to do Gentlemates on their own, I see that argument. If you want to do some combination of three teams up at the top there, I think I could get on board with that as well. So I think that's kind of where the most of these power rankings would be open to interpretation. I think the middle of the pack is kind of like, um, you know, I don't want to say set, but it's kind of like played out to the point where we know which teams are in the middle there. It's just a question of how they finish out. Like we have Carolina. I would probably say both of us have Carolina a little lower than some other
Yeah.
people would, just because of their strong honeymoon phase at the start there with Exceed. But like a team like Carolina, they could end up technically in like sixth place, and we would be off on that. But I think like still, based on what we've seen, that they're more of a middle of the pack team, especially given the land performance just not matching up with what we've seen online. So, um, I think probably the most surprising thing from my power rankings for me is Falcons just being a little lower on them, but I mean that might be a little influenced by this past week of matches, and it might have been potentially had them higher, maybe like the top of C tier, but I couldn't put them. If we did this after Major One and not Week One, maybe I definitely would have had Falcons above Boston, but I couldn't put Falcons above Boston in this because Boston just beat them. So, um, yeah, I think overall we were pretty similar in power rankings. I think you can't really argue C9 and Vancouver as the bottom teams and the two teams most likely to miss Major Two. I think the combination of teams at the top is the same. Just how you break
Hmm.
it down is the biggest difference. And then, like I said, the middle of the pack, um, the teams are mostly there. It's just how you're feeling about them on any given day, sort of deal.
I think that there's a pretty clear top five ish so far this season. Like Paris, Optic, and Phase, and then Minnesota have been like pretty consistent, like top four. Like Minnesota, especially more recently, LAT has probably the better overall season if you're looking at it that way because they have like an early win over Falcons who finished 5-2 and everything.
Well,
Um,
that's what
yeah, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say. That's why I didn't want to like categorize it as a quote unquote top four, because I would say G2 have played better than Carolina and uh, Falcons of late, but both Carolina and Falcons went 5-2 in those major one qualifiers, and G2 like barely squeaked. They went 3-4
Yeah.
in the major one qualifier. So that's definitely a little more recent. But I mean, if we had to look at the overall standings, did the CDL update this yet? I noticed it. So Brian Stats, who shout out Brian Stats because we bring him up on on this pod pretty regularly. He tweeted something the other day about like rookie wins so far this year, and it was at 1 a.m. and I was just like, I saw it and I was like, this doesn't mention Mamba at all. And then I went to the CDL standings page. For whatever reason, the regular season standings page on the CDL website does not reflect the uh the major. It's only counting qualifier matches for the standings.
That makes
And so
sense
like
from
if you
yeah.
look at that, G2 is 4-5. It doesn't factor in their wins at Major 1. Miami is 4-5. It doesn't factor in they won two matches in the lower bracket despite starting in the losers bracket and not having a winners bracket spot. So like a lot of rookies, so the Carolina rookies and Lurks and Craze are at 6. Mamba, I think now might be at 6 wins. Maybe it's only 5. I can't remember. He was at 5, but I don't know if that I tweeted that before or after a qualifier win this past week. And then Trakes would be at 6 too because he had 2 wins at the major. So it was a kind of weird discovery that I'm not sure why. Because like the points, like Gentlemates are in first with 70, but obviously they have more than 70 points from just winning the major alone. So not sure what the deal is with that for the CDL page, because I know like it's clearly updated with the qualifier matches that happened this past weekend, just it doesn't include Major 1 for whatever reason.
Yeah, I noticed that because I was trying to look at Toronto's record and it said that they were 3-6. I was like, well, I'm pretty sure that they weren't undefeated before they went on this losing streak. So
Yeah.
I knew that wasn't correct. So I had to go to the COD Gamepedia to actually look up what the standings were. So I don't know why it's like that, but it's quite annoying. But as far as
Does
your
okay, Wikipedia does have the updated standings. So yeah,
yeah.
G2 has 6, Miami has 6, so like all of the top rookies do have 6 wins right now, which is kind of interesting to consider for the early rookie of the year stuff.
Yeah, and as far as our power rankings go, I think it would have been quite different had we done this last week
Yeah.
before the matches because, like Miami is in your B tier, and I don't know if they would have been in your B tier if they had not just beaten FaZe. And like you said, with Falcons losing to Boston, they wouldn't have been below Boston or maybe even in the same tier as Boston if they just
Yeah.
hadn't lost to them. And then Carolina, it's just like they have to prove it like again basically because that was the biggest thing when we went into the first major is that they won all these matches, they've looked great, but they're also a team that we don't usually expect to be good, and so they have to prove it, and then when they fail like they did, they have to prove it all over again and then hopefully do something at the major. Granted, they will have a longer stretch online to win matches and keep rising up the standings, and so that should help them. But they are certainly pretty low because of that major performance, as well as the Falcons. You know, both of those teams finishing 5-2 and being like in the second or third to bottom tier for us just shows that LAN does mean quite a bit. And if you're going to a LAN and you're only winning one match or not even a match, then it's going to be hard to get into that top 6 in terms of our power rankings, I think. Anything else on the power rankings before we move on?
No, I mean just to bring it up because you had me dig through the
Yep.
notes and find them, so I'm not gonna not mention them, but our power rankings from the the preseason, I just know the big thing here is I had Gentlemates in fourth, and in my B tier, and you had Gentlemates in your second tier, but you had Optic only by themselves. And I just want to bring that up because I know we definitely were higher on that Gentlemate squad than a lot of other people going into the season. So we technically had them lower than what we have them now, but shout out us for believing in the talent instead of the rumors and stuff on potential chemistry issues and blah blah.
Yeah. So in your power rankings, you had Optic alone and FaZe and LAT, and then in another tier, Paris and Toronto. I think, and then I had a similar setup where I had Optic at the top, and then 4 teams in the next tier, which was Miami, Paris, FaZe, and LAT. So basically, we each got one team wrong out of what we thought would be kind of that upper echelon of the CDL. For you, it was Toronto. For me, it was Miami. Neither team have looked particularly well. I think Miami a little bit better, but certainly not in the contenders club, which I had put them in to start this season. And I put a bunch of teams at the very bottom because we had no idea what to really expect of those teams. And I think that's kind of bore out a little bit. Like Carolina has been better, at least online, than I thought they would be. And obviously Minnesota has been the biggest revelation because you had them in your C tier, so you had them higher than I did, but I had them at the very bottom with Carolina, C9, Vancouver, and Boston. So yeah, we don't know everything, but we do know quite a few things, and I think that kind of proves it here. Who knew? Who could have predicted that Optic, FaZe, LAT, and Paris would have been pretty good to start this season? I think that about does it for the power rankings. Let's hop into these matches. The Major 2 qualifier matches. This is the second week after we're gonna have a lot of supersized weeks, I think, to come because, like we've said, there's 11 matches for every single team, and we've only been doing about half of that in the past few years. So this is different, and I think this definitely gives a team like Toronto who's trying to work through some things, it helps them in a way because they're going to be able to see a bunch of different looks, and hopefully Kips gets a lot of experience over the next few weeks playing online matches, or sometimes he would play 2 weeks, but he'd play 2 matches in 2 weeks, which is not ideal. I don't think that'll be a problem here, even though the schedule is not very friendly to the Toronto Koi in general. But on Friday, February 20th, we start off with Vancouver versus FaZe. FaZe looked really bad against Miami. Like, they came out flat and they lost that, but I think it's a little bit different of a ball game playing against the Vancouver Surge. So I'll go with FaZe.
Yeah, I'm not gonna think too much about this. Give me FaZe.
Falcons versus C9. C9 did look better than expected in their debut with the new roster, but they still lost. Falcons, they went 0-2, so this is not necessarily a must win, but if you're losing to C9 and you're starting 0-3, it would feel like a must win, so I will go the Falcons.
Yeah, gotta go Falcons. I think it's kind of a little funny how I mentioned it last episode. One of the things I'm going to be keeping an eye on here is how this C9 squad would rank up against the all Saudi Falcon squad from the start of last year, and now we're getting a Falcons versus C9 matchup. Even though obviously the Falcon squad is much different than that one that kicked off the year last year, but yeah, I can't pick the C9 squad until I see some sign. I don't want to say want to see some signs of life. They only played one last match last week, and they definitely were more competitive than I think a lot of people expected. But I still got to go with Falcons here.
And then the last match on Friday is Toronto versus LAT. Certainly the most intriguing match on Friday. I'm going to go with LAT, but Toronto did sweep the Thieves. I think that is their last win. Their most recent win was that 3-0 sweep against Thieves. I think that was the first week after the break, so it's been over a month now, and Toronto hasn't won since then. LAT obviously have Neum in the roster. This could be the hardest match that Neum has played. They had like a relatively straightforward schedule last week, but Toronto has also not been very good. So I'll go with LAT, but I'm very interested.
Yeah, still don't know for sure if Toronto's roster is set for this week or not. So I
Yeah.
definitely have to pick LAT. Um, at the at the lowest point, or I don't know what I was thinking there. I kind of just brain freezed. At least we see Kips versus Neum, and I think we talk about like the soft landing spots versus the hard debut matches. We always have that conversation. I think although this LAT matchup is a difficult one on paper, I do think there's got to be some at least like sort of, I don't know if sibling rivalry is the best way to describe it, but without a better phrase, like just like two former teammates from this year, like a couple weeks removed from playing at an event together, now playing against each other in the CDL in Kips's debut and Neum's third overall match. Like I feel like there's got to be some friendly banter there in some regards. So I think that's a cool thing to look out for here. But yeah, I totally expect LAT to win this one unless there's just some insane Toronto honeymoon phase that kickstarts with the Kips move.
And that kind of leads us into Saturday because Toronto plays the last match on Friday and the first match on Saturday. They play G2 to start Saturday. I just put in my power rankings that G2 and LAT are right next to each other,
Yeah.
and G2 has certainly proven to be, I think a better team in general at certain points, especially recently before LAT's roster change at least. So I'll go with G2, but like you said, if Toronto has this honeymoon period, it might sweep up and catch LAT and G2.
Yeah, I gotta go with G2 too. Just I mean, to be frank, we literally do not know for sure what four players are playing for Toronto this week.
Yeah.
We have a strong, we know three. It's just a question of insight or somebody else. So I can't in good conscience pick Toronto this week, and I don't know. Even if I knew for sure Insight was playing or whatnot, it still would be really tough for me to pick them without seeing Kips in action. So I got to go G2 here.
Then LAT versus Boston. Obviously, LAT should win this as they should beat Boston every time, but we have learned many
Uh,
times in the past that is not the case. So I'll go with the Thieves still.
yep, give me LAT. That means Boston's pulling off an upset here.
I mean, they're good for one every 2 or 3 weeks. So maybe they did too much last week against Falcons. Gentlemaids versus Carolina up next. Again, like Carolina has been very good online. I think they're with exceeds 6-1 on in online matches,
Yep.
which is one of the best records in the CDL. But they didn't look as unstoppable as they had previously last week. And Paris is probably the best team in the world. So I will go Paris, but I certainly could see a world where Carolina actually wins this match.
Yeah, I mean the Royal Routers would have to be out in full force for this one, but give me Gentlemates here.
And then the last match on Saturday is Optic versus Miami. Um, I mean, Miami, I'm pretty sure gave Optic like a pretty stiff test when they faced them earlier in the season. I will go with Optic. Obviously, they are the better, more talented team, but Optic historically has had a Florida curse put on them
Yeah,
and
true.
struggled against the Florida teams, whether it be the Mutineers or Heretics. I just don't know if that'll be enough for the Heretics here.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the matchup, if I remember correctly, I think it was the third match for Miami this year. So I think it was like their first match after the week where we heard about the visa issues and the struggles in practice or lack of practice and all that. And they definitely did look better in the Optic match than they did in their previous matches, but it was still a very early iteration of this Miami team that was definitely not as well prepared or well practiced as the current Miami team. Still gonna go with Optic here, but I do think that, especially given the Miami over phase result, this could be closer than other people expect, and other people could probably just like insta pick Optic and not think about it, but this could be a sneaky opportunity for Miami to show what they're capable of.
Yeah, and Miami just beat FaZe, who FaZe is a more talented team than the Heretics are, but Miami did that last year a lot, where they could beat FaZe, they could beat LAT on LAN even, and I think they're often underestimated. They've certainly earned, I guess, that estimation this season so far. They have just been very inconsistent. But like I said, I think even last week, like being inconsistent doesn't mean that you're bad, and it can really catch up to some teams who are just underestimating an inconsistent team like the Heretics. Sunday, February 22nd, last day of the Major 2 Week 2 qualifiers. We start off with the ReeaL Falcons versus the Carolina Royal Ravens, which is just a really interesting match in general, but I think especially because Falcons had that 0-2 week, I still expect them to beat C9 earlier in the week. Carolina is far less of a certainty to beat, and there's a real possibility the Falcons will be 1-3 to start the qualifiers. There's even a chance that Carolina themselves will start the qualifiers 1-3 as well, because if
Yeah.
they lose to Paris and then they lose the Falcons, then that's a pretty bad start after winning 5 straight online qualifiers heading into Major 1. So I will go with the Falcons on this. I think this is kind of a coin flip. I don't know if you can feel real confident about either team considering where they are post Major 1, but I think the Falcons have a little bit more talent, and I don't, I'm kind of out on Carolina until
Yeah.
they're able to pull me back in. If they go 2-0 this week, I'm fully back on the bandwagon.
No, yeah, I was definitely thinking more in tune with this being an online match, and I'm going with Carolina here. Um, as you were talking, and the more I'm thinking about it, I definitely think I like the Falcons pick more, just because, kind of as you alluded to, I think Falcons has more talent and is the better team, but I think Carolina has been the better team online with this iteration, which is weird to say because they both went 5-2 in the qualifiers, but obviously, um, Carolina was 5-0 with this specific roster. So, um, yeah, I don't know. I think it's good we got something different here. So I'll stick with Carolina, but I think this has got Game 5, Round 11 written all over it in my eyes.
Next up, Vancouver versus Boston. I if I'm not mistaken, Vancouver beat Boston
Yep,
for their first win of the season.
only
Um,
win.
yeah,
Oh no, they won it major one too.
yeah. So, yeah, I think it'd be fair to pick Vancouver in this matchup. But I like the last time. Still think that Boston should win. Um, I that doesn't mean they will, but I will pick Boston.
I got to go with Boston too, and it's looking rough when I'm picking Boston. So, um, yeah, I mean the proof is in the pudding, or whatever the saying is. Like we've seen Vancouver beat the squad earlier this year, but everything should be Boston is able to win this match, and I gonna go with that.
It would be very like the Boston Breach for them to beat LAT and then lose to Vancouver in the same week.
Yes, yes.
Optic versus C9 up next. Obviously going to pick Optic here.
Optic, 100%. Not even thinking about it.
And then the best match of the week by
Yep.
far, G2 versus FaZe in the final match. We have seen these two teams play 3 times over the past month, I want to say, because
At least 3.
yeah, I mean they played in the round 1 of Major 1 and G2 won that match. And then they played did they play later in Major 1 as well, or did they just play?
I thought so. Wasn't it the first match on Championship Sunday?
And FaZe won that. So yeah. So that mean I'm pretty sure they played 3 times this season, and 3 times in the last probably 4 weeks. G2 is 2-1 against FaZe. They had beaten them the first 2 times they played them. FaZe got the the upper hand on the last time they played. But G2 is really like I said when G2 beat them the first time, that I think it was just people thought Minnesota losing game 5s meant that they're bad, and I don't know if that was really the case. I think they are a top 5 team at this point, and FaZe, like we just saw last week against Miami, has not looked the greatest. So I could definitely pick G2. I will pick FaZe. I tend to, in kind of a tiebreaker situation, be like, which team has better players, more talent, and I certainly think FaZe does, but that hasn't worked out 2 out of the last 3 times, so I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, so I was looking at this as obviously for the notes. I always fill this out and then I find out your picks live while we're doing this. And as I was filling them out, I looked at this match and I thought this was going to be our only match where we would potentially have a different pick. I thought there was a world where you were going to go G2 and I was going to go FaZe, and then if we were in a position where we were all chalk on the 10 previous matches and you picked FaZe, I was going to go with G2, but we got our Carolina Falcons match where we're split this week, and that'll be our only one where we're different. I got to stick with FaZe. It would have felt so weird for me to pick again. I mean, the number of times I've picked against FaZe can probably be counted on one hand, if not 2 at most. But picking G2 over FaZe in a random online match, that would have felt really weird to me. I definitely could see it happening, just given how the matchup has played out this year so far. But I'll stick with FaZe here, and we can both be wrong together.
Yeah, and FaZe, if we just look historically, typically has one team every year at least where they just give FaZe a ton of trouble. And I forget what year it was. Maybe it's 2 years ago now, before Draza got picked up, but with Slasher, I believe. And Optic was that team where they beat them 6 times, and FaZe had 1 win that entire season against Optic. And I mean, it would be even weirder if it was G2, who I don't think either of us think are in that upper echelon. We didn't put them in the power rankings as such, but in that top 3, meaning it would be weird if it was them, but we've seen weirder things, and FaZe has had quite a bit of trouble the last 3 times that they've played them. So it'll be interesting. I think they got it right by picking this match as the final one, and it really fits. Pick them though this season. We are both 46-25 on the year, except Trimmer, who is winless. Please subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. I believe we already hit 280 subscribers on YouTube. I think when I saw the last video, which you pointed out to me is like one of our best performing videos, I think in the history of our channel, but certainly in quite a bit of time, which is always great to see. And then I told you, like, as far as the podcast listens, I don't know. I haven't checked on this most recent episode, but the 2 episodes before that were performing really, really well. One of our or 2 of our most listened to podcasts in a long time, which was even more surprising because I guess one of them there was like a week off in between or whatever, so you could kind of understand that. But then there was another, and we did a podcast 3 days later, and it was still already one of the most listened to. So that was great. We really appreciate your guys' support. If you can, please follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcasters at Ego Chall Podcast. If you want to watch the stream live, you can do so either on YouTube or on Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. You can follow on Twitch, and you can also subscribe to the Twitch channel. You can also follow and subscribe to Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. And we'll be back on Sunday, most likely, Sunday night after the matches to talk. Probably 9, 10, 11, depending on if there are a bunch of issues. We'll never really know with the CDL when they're deciding to take a really long time. But we'll be back on Sunday night to talk about the week 2 matches and then whatever happened. Maybe Toronto had made another roster change by that point, and we'll have even more to talk about. But yeah, that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for all the support. It really does mean a lot. And Preston already broke down all the recent metrics and whatnot. So definitely appreciate you guys. And hopefully you're enjoying the content and here for the long haul. So thank you guys for that. If you, as always, if you have any feedback, constructive criticism, whatnot, and you want to leave it in the comments on Apple Podcast or the YouTube video or whatever the case may be, definitely do that. And we love reading the comments and shouting people out when they got good stuff to say for us. So yeah, I think pretty in the grand scheme of things, this is one of our shorter episodes in recent history, but it was pretty action packed and we had some good stuff to talk about. So I'm happy with it, and I'm ready for another weekend of matches. So looking forward to that. We'll be back here pretty soon to break it all down. And yeah, until next time, thank you guys as always. And remember to send the chow.